Welcome to Now and Forever, a series of 10-minute reflections on good news spirituality, sponsored by the Charles and Catherine Free family with headquarters in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and brought to you from Our Lady of the Sacred Heart Church here in Watertown, New York. With me as usual, hi everybody, I'm Father Vince Free, missionary of the Sacred Heart. With me as usual is Vicki Phillips.
Hi, Father.
Member of the parish here. And taking Pat Henry's place, we have Dan DeVito. Dan, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
Okay, Dan's a seminarian. He's here doing summer work, and he knows a lot about this stuff because he's studying theology. So I'm going to start us off this evening with in this session, and this is all about evangelization. We're just kind of looking at evangelization from different aspects, and one of the aspects, of course, is how religion figures in one's culture. Among tribal peoples, there was no distinction or separation between governance, law, and religion. All institutions and aspects of daily life were focused on survival. However, leadership roles in most tribal societies were divided among several heads. In many areas of Papua New Guinea, for example, there was the equivalent of a war leader, a judge, and a minister of religion. Often enough, these leaders emerged from the group by being recognized as above average in the knowledge and skills required for each of the roles. I know this from personal experience, especially the judge, the guy who ruled on whether you owned ground or all the different things that was equivalent of a judge in our own society. I didn't know any war leaders, but I knew a few of the ones that were like what they call the minister of religion. Now, it says here the chieftain in charge of military affairs was not necessarily well suited for the work of a judge, whose primary role was to maintain order and peace within the tribe, applying an exhaustive and unassailable knowledge of traditional values and customary practice, particularly in regard to marriage and the use and ownership of land. The shaman, or religious leader, often seen as a witch doctor by outsiders, had to ward off evil spirits, cure the sick, and in general keep the ancestors and tribal gods in a constant state of repairs. That's a big old sentence, isn't it? But here, the point that I think that has to be made here is that at one time culture, like we said in that a couple of days ago, or sessions ago, we mentioned that culture, the word cultus, means worship. And that's where you got like cult. And culture is actually the cultivation of certain values and truths and so forth. And so that it requires a positive pursuit on the part of people. And there was no separation between your religion and your law and your government. There was all one thing. Although there were these three different heads that you had, and they were what they call emergent leaders. They just were recognized as being competent in those certain areas. So this sets the stage now for paragraph number 2. Vicki, you're going to read that?
I have a question first.
Hold on, we got a question.
So,
hey,
you had the minister, okay?
Yeah.
And then you had the shaman.
Well, that's the same guy.
Who is a religious leader.
Yeah.
Are they? That's the same thing. Okay.
They call him a shaman, but see, people usually call him a witch doctor. You know, we saw him as witch doctor. Well, a lot of people did. But they were really, they were not, they were people that some were witch doctors. They had power. Some, I think, are really, the occult. But a normal, the witch doctor that we call a witch doctor was actually someone who could heal somebody who was sick or had a fever. I saw one of these guys at work. A kid had like a convulsion or, a fit or something. And he took banana leaves and warmed them over the fire. And then he rubbed the guy down. And this kid just came back to normal. And that's the kind of stuff. He's a real doctor, and he knew what to do. I had other cases, similar cases, where they resorted to herbs and drugs and stuff and did a good job. So you had the war leader, and there were constant warfare in Papua New Guinea. There was 800 different languages and all these people at war all the time. But then you had this guy who was the judge, who had ruled on marriage, whether you could marry or have ground, and what you did with the ground and so on, and then the shaman. Okay, what next paragraph?
What you see here is not a separation of church and state, but a separation of the powers of church and state. If you read American history, specifically as it spells out the reasons for people to come from Europe to the New World in pursuit of the religious freedom, you will find that our forefathers had the same idea in mind. Further to this, if you look at the matter in the light of reason, you will reach the conclusion that this is the way it still should be in our own day.
Okay, so here's the big, it's not the separation of church and state, but the separation of the powers of church and state. And how we know that, Dan, when you read the Declaration of Independence, remember that? But when in the course of human events it becomes necessary to justify by nature and God's nature and nature's God to separate and set up your own government. There are 3 other explicit references to God. The one where it says first, the Creator gives you these inalienable rights, and the other one is that He's the supreme judge. It's not the Supreme Court is not the supreme judge by any shot, fortunately. But he talks about this. The founding father, about the supreme judge, and the last mention they make is about divine providence, explicitly when they pledge their honor and their fortunes on under the scrutiny of the judge and divine providence. So okay, the one thing you can be sure that when our founding fathers came here from Europe, they were not trying to get rid of religion. They were trying to have a freedom to practice it. And the one thing they knew for sure is that the queen or the king should not be head of both the church and the state. That they didn't want any part of. But that didn't mean the church didn't have powers. Now today it's as though you got to save the state from the church. No, the church. My goodness, people say, thank God we have democracy, we can practice our religion. No, thank God we have religion, we can practice democracy. Because if you don't have religion or morals, you can't practice democracy. It's really as simple as that. But that's what this paragraph there, that central paragraph, it says that's the way it should be in our own day. If we don't have religion or morality or common values, how can we have a democracy? It's like everybody prints your own money. You can't have an economy if everybody prints their own money. And here we're supposed to have some kind of a democracy without any value base to bring us together and proceed forward. So,
what year? Do you remember what year it was when they started to take anything that had to do with church out of the schools? Because back when I was in school, we were still.
Yeah, me too.
Okay.
You're much more recent than me, but we started the day with the Our Father and a reading from Simon Schuster's public school. Mm-hmm. Simon Schuster Bible Stories for Children. And we said the Our Father and pledged allegiance to the flag, and then we had that Simon Schuster's about the Jews being in Egypt and all this sort of thing, But where it really started in earnest was with the Declaration, the Humanist Manifesto, which was, I think, in St. Louis in 1932 or 33. That was a real drive when people started organized secular humanism. And they advertise it as a religion, which is a funny thing, because by reason of the anti-establishment clause, they are really trying to push religion out in the name of religion. It's by the name of non-religion, which is religion. We better get on with that last paragraph there. Dan, why don't you read that one and we'll wrap this thing up.
As mentioned earlier, the practice of religion, which constitutes the what and why of a given course of action, is an essential and pivotal aspect of culture. The intent to build a society on moral neutrality is as idiotic as a madman who thinks that he's Napoleon. However, we needn't develop an adversarial relationship with enlightened secular humanists,
there it is, right there.
Even though they are in favor of tolerance for everything except religion, as in the case of some groups out there. What you and I have to do is join with others in the task of restoring faith and gospel values to a culture that best defines a truly American way of life. And this is what we call evangelization.
Very good. And what this is, in essence, what Teilhard de Chardin says it this way: is evil exists, but it has no being. In other words, evil is always it doesn't exist in itself. It's always a deprivation of truth and value and love and goodness in something that exists. Like he puts it this way: if a room is dark, it's because of the absence of light. You can't bail out the darkness, you have to add light. Same thing is true of evangelization. You just can't be opposed to these things. You have to bring values into life, into culture, that really authorize what we want to see is appreciation for life and for goodness and beauty and truth, all those things. So this is all we're talking about evangelization here. Like you said, this is called evangelization. Bringing gospel values into the culture and cultures of the world. Thanks for listening. We'll be back soon. Take care. God bless.